Hello, my name is Kai, author of Existential Horror, and there's a very good chance you have absolutely no idea what I mean when I say that. So let's talk about it. To start, I'd like to clarify a few things. First, existential horror has a lot of syllables, so I'm going to use Exorr as an abbreviation for it. Otherwise, I'm going to bite my tongue off one day, and quite frankly, I like having one. Second, Lovecraft is cosmic horror. Better examples of Exorr would be The Twilight Zone, Black Mirror, Arrival, Nightcrawler, The Witch, The Matrix, The Truman Show, Stranger Than Fiction, The Giver, The Road, Niebla, which Stranger Than Fiction is based on, Those Who Walk Away from Omelas, Hoseki no Kuni, Shinsekai Yori, Mushishi, though you are welcome to debate me on that. And of course, for anyone who does not have triphobia, mega trigger warning if you have triphobia, any of Junjo Ito's works. Put all these together, some of you might be thinking, wait a second, some of these aren't horror. The Matrix is action, The Truman Show is comedy, Mushishi is a kind of episode where you pop on an episode before going to bed. Sure, it's eerie and haunting, but it's not scary. So that brings us to clarification number 3. Existential horror itself, where the name comes from, is a type of horror. As in horror, the emotion. It is that uncomfortable feeling you get when you become aware of the nature of your own existence. But existential horror as a genre isn't really a subgenre of horror, as in horror, the genre. If I was forced to pick a parent genre, Exorr is a type of thriller. What is the difference between a thriller and a horror? Thrillers focus on suspense, trying to figure out what is going on, what is happening. The climax of the story is finding out, which ultimately has led to the thriller's fetish for plot twists. Horror, on the other hand, is that feeling of repulsion or disgust after you find out. Thus, in horror movies, the plot is a lot more straightforward. You know what's going on, you know what the evil is. The goal then isn't to solve the overarching mystery, it's to defeat the object of disgust, to defeat the evil, or get away. Many stories often combine the two, which makes things a little more confusing. So one way to decide whether or not something is labeled horror over thriller is whether or not science fiction or fantasy is involved. Supernatural stuff, middle ground. And it should be noted, just because something has horror elements doesn't make it a horror. Exhibit A, The Sixth Sense. This is not a horror film, it is a supernatural psychological thriller. Why don't I just use a massive glob of labels instead of trying to create a new genre category? I'll talk about the importance of labels in another video, but the short answer is self-branding and the economics of supply and demand. That said, Exorr is not quite a subcategory of thriller either. It is actually a cross-genre. Other cross-genre you might be familiar with are historical romance, comprised of historical fiction and romance, dark fantasy, composed of fantasy and horror, and Weird West, which is Western meets speculative fiction. Exorr, in this case, is made up of metaphysical and existential fiction, subcategory of philosophical fiction, speculative fiction, the overarching lump of fantasy, science fiction, supernatural, and so on, and psychological fiction, usually psychological thrillers. Putting this more directly, you have a story with some mystery. You don't know what's going on, you don't know what's going to happen next, edge of your seat. That is a thriller. You then focus on the psychological states of the characters, their worldview, their identity, and so on. The thriller becomes a psychological thriller. Then you introduce whatever speculative likes. Fantasy, science fiction, supernatural, maybe supernatural. The psychological thriller may or may not now be a psychological horror. Wrap that all up in the goal giving either your protagonist or your audience more often an existential crisis. Now you've got an existential horror. Or we can just jump to the super short definition of man versus reality. Okay, are we done? Excellent. Wait, is this still on? Wait, what do you mean I'm not done? I just... Okay, so suppose you want to write an Exorr yourself, or you've written your own story and want to figure out if it can be considered a genre. You're going to have to end up explaining to people anyway, because that's why I started this channel. What is the pattern you are looking for? An Exorr can be oversimplified into having three main features and a gimmick. The three main features are metaphysical shenanigans, epistemological problems, and a world-driven narrative exploring these shenanigans to resolve these problems. The gimmick is knowledge. Breaking that down for you. Metaphysics is the weird branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of reality. It asks the questions, what is real? What exists? Why does it exist? What are its properties? It deals with things like the mind-body problem, the laws of nature, the nature of space and time, identity, determinism versus free will, and so on. Epistemology is a branch of philosophy that deals with the nature of knowledge, awareness of reality, a relationship with reality, what is true, what is false, how do we know the things we believe to be true are true, and the things we believe to be false. Combine those two together, we have a basic setup for an Exorr, where all your life you have essentially grown up inside of a metaphorical fish bowl. You have been taught or come to the conclusion that the world works a certain way, there are certain rules, basic facts, and logic that have determined how you view yourself, how you interact with the people around you, and how you navigate the world you live in. Throw in some metaphysical shenanigans, the world you thought you knew, your entire reality, starts to fall apart. You begin to question your sanity, your sense of self, if you aren't crazy, and this new reality is in fact the truth of the world you didn't know before. Then what do you do with this new information? What is the world you live in really like? How do you survive in it? Is there even a point in trying to survive at all? Which brings us to the gimmick. If the gimmick in science fiction is usually technology, if in fantasy it's usually magic, the gimmick of existential horror is knowledge. The continual question being whether it's better to know or to remain in ignorance. But there is a slight catch. Neither knowing nor ignorance is inherently better. But you're going to learn things whether you want to or not, and it will completely change how you think about yourself and the world around you, and you will probably miss not knowing. For some examples, in The Matrix, Neo finds out reality is just a simulation. Truman Show. Truman finds out his entire life has been nothing but a fabricated TV show. In Eye of the Beholder, one of the most famous Twilight Zone episodes, the protagonist lives in a world where people we think of as beautiful are considered ugly, and people we think of ugly are considered beautiful. Something that also distinguishes Exorr from more mainstream genre is that it really doesn't concern itself too much with ethics. Basic example, the movie Nightcrawler. Characters may have personal morals they act on or be forced to act against. Characters may debate ethics themselves, but the nature of the story of itself, things aren't good or bad. They simply are. People act, actions have consequences, those consequences aren't always pleasant. Thus, the necessity of the third feature of Exorr a world-driven narrative. At the start of a story, we have some sort of established reality. This is the world the protagonist lives in, this is what they know, this is who they are. But to quote the Matrix here, you take the blue pill, the story ends. You wake up in your bed and believe whatever you want to believe. You take the red pill, you stay in Wonderland, and I show you how deep the rabbit hole goes. Cue metaphysical shenanigans. Reality starts to implode. Now we have a mystery. If the world isn't what you thought it was, then what is this new world supposed to be? How does it work? What are the rules? Why does the protagonist, very important detail, not know about any of them? Thus, the story tends to answer out these questions, and we end up with the driving conflict of the story. Man versus reality. That said, something I'd like to emphasize here, when I talk about exploring the reality the story takes place in, I don't mean the protagonist is always the one doing it. The protagonist can be completely and totally ignorant the entire time, as is the case with the previously mentioned Twilight Zone episode, Eye of the Beholder. The ones you want to be teaching and giving knowledge to about this world and this reality they're in is the audience. Gotta now understand everything, good, bad. I've made absolutely everything more confusing than before. Okay, how about 2 movies from the great and mighty Stephen King? Well, on top of not reading Lovecraft, I don't read Stephen King. Why is a topic for another video. Until then... The Green Mile counts as Exorr because the focus on the story is man versus reality. You learn what it's like to live on death row, the people who end up there. Some of them are guilty, some of them probably not. In particular, there is a specific man on death row who is charged with brutally murdering 2 girls. While he physically looks like a type of person to do it, his personality, on the other hand, warrants a lot of room for doubt. And then there is some supernatural stuff thrown in. The Mist, in contrast, while it has one of the most beautiful moments of existential horror as an emotion I have seen at the end of a film, it is not existential horror itself because it isn't man versus reality. The Mist is cosmic horror. If it was told from the point of view of certain characters, it could probably be Exorr, but what the film gives us is pretty much a standard man versus man and man versus monster plot. That is the core conflict. I'm also hesitant to say that any trope where a door opens up to another world qualifies as metaphysical shenanigans because it doesn't really warp or play with the rules of our world. It just says there's another one. Of course, you are welcome to disagree. If you think the Green Mist is existential horror, if you think the Green Mile is an existential horror, let me know in the comments. I love learning new things I haven't learned before because there is no better fuel for my never-ending spiral into insanity. And that is the end of what I wanted to say in this video. If you want to learn more about my genre, writing shenanigans, stuff I care too much about, and all that blah, click like and subscribe. Otherwise, until next time, stay uncomfortable.